At our anniversary gala, my wife announced my retirement. Before I knew I was leaving. My wife announced my retirement with one hand still resting on my chest. There were 112 people in the ballroom when Lena lifted her glass and smiled at me like I was a man she still recognized. The chandeliers were warm above us. The quartet was playing too softly to matter. Behind her, through the tall, arched windows, Savannah shimmered in river light and old money. We were supposed to be celebrating 17 years of marriage and the best quarter Mercer House had seen since my father died. Instead, my wife said, "Gabriel has carried this place long enough. After everything his health has been through this year, he's finally agreed to step back and rest. Adrian and I will be overseeing the next chapter of Mercer House." People applauded. That was the first moment I understood how betrayal really works. Not loudly, not with broken glass or slammed doors. It comes dressed for dinner. It speaks in a calm voice. It borrows your name and uses it in a sentence you never agreed to. I stood there with my hand around my champagne flute and felt every face in the room turn toward me, waiting for the grateful smile of a tired man being relieved of his burdens. My younger brother Adrian lifted his glass beside her. My brother. He was wearing my father's cufflinks. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Gold knots, subtle, old. My father had worn them every Christmas Eve and every funeral worth respecting. I had locked them in the office safe the week after he died. Seeing them on Adrian's wrists felt more intimate than seeing him with his hand on my wife's back. Because yes, his hand was there too. Low, familiar, not accidental. Our daughter June was seated 3 tables away between my Aunt Evelyn and the hotel's executive chef. She was 16 and had inherited her mother's stillness and my habit of watching a room before speaking in it. When Lena made the announcement, June did not clap. She looked at me. That was when I smiled. Not because I was calm, because my father taught me a long time ago that the first person who shows his wound loses control of the room. So I put 2 fingers lightly over Lena's hand, as if her words had moved me, and I nodded to our guests. "If my wife says I've agreed," I said, "then I suppose I've been outvoted." That earned a soft wave of laughter. Lena laughed too, relieved. Adrian's shoulders loosened. The room began to breathe again. Only June kept staring. I kissed Lena on the cheek, lifted my glass toward the crowd, and let them believe whatever story they needed for the evening to continue. Then I excused myself and went upstairs to my office, where I locked the door behind me and stood in the dark until I could trust my hands again. My name is Gabriel Mercer. I am 43 years old, and until that night I had spent my whole life inside Mercer House, not living in it. Inside it. There is a difference. Mercer House is a 14-room hotel on Columbia Square, 3 stories of brick, iron balconies, polished walnut floors, and inherited pressure. My grandfather bought it in 1962 when it was still a dying boarding house with mold in the walls and a reputation you could not advertise. My father, Thomas Mercer, turned it into something quieter and more expensive. Not luxury in the loud sense, luxury in the old Southern sense. Thick curtains, proper silver, staff who remembered your coffee order and never interrupted grief. People got married there. People came there after funerals. People signed contracts in our parlor and ended marriages in our courtyard. If you stayed long enough in one place, you learned that human beings preferred to perform their most important moments under good lighting. I grew up in the apartment above the carriage house, running invoices to my father's office when I was 10, carrying linen baskets at 13, checking in guests at 16 when the front desk manager had migraines. By 22, I knew every leak, every supplier, every shade of dishonest in a man asking for 30 extra days to settle a bill. Adrian knew other things. He knew how to charm women older than him, how to lose money with confidence, how to make recklessness look like appetite. He was 3 years younger and had spent most of our childhood discovering that if I was dependable enough, he could afford not to be. My mother used to call us the wall and the fire. She said one son held the house up and the other one lit every room before leaving it. She died when I was 19. My father never remarried. After that, Mercer House stopped pretending to be a family business and became what it had always really been. My father's way of grieving in public without having to call it grief. I met Lena Vaughn when I was 26, and she was planning a charity auction in our ballroom. She walked through the hotel like she had been born expecting space to arrange itself around her. Not rude, just certain. Tall, elegant, dark hair pinned back too severely for someone her age, clipboard in hand, that cool voice event planners have when they are deciding whether a room is usable or merely decorative. She told me my centerpieces were wrong. I married her 11 months later. I have thought about that more than once. Not because it was a mistake, at least not then, but because some kinds of love begin in correction. You meet someone who sees what you have accepted for years and tells you it could be sharper, cleaner, more beautiful. If you are tired enough or lonely enough, that feels like salvation. Lena made Mercer House matter to people who had never heard of my father's standards and would not have cared if they had. She brought in corporate retreats, wedding packages, editorial shoots, winter galas. She understood aspiration in a way I never did. I understood continuity. She understood hunger. For a long time, those things fit together. For a long time, I loved her for making the house feel less like a mausoleum. Then my father died 2 years ago in the room at the end of the West Hall, the room with the river view he always refused to rent because my mother liked that light in the morning. He went the same way he lived, neatly, with his paperwork in order and everyone else left to carry the silence after. He left Mercer House to me, not in a way anyone could fight. The will was clean. Control passed to me. Adrian received a smaller cash inheritance and 2 investment accounts my father had been feeding for years, as if he knew one day guilt might require structure. Adrian burned through most of that money in 11 months. Then he came back. He sat in my office one hot August afternoon wearing a suit too sharp for the weather and said he wanted to help. He had changed, he said. He was tired of chasing things that did not last. He wanted to come home. He wanted to honor our father. He wanted to build something real with me before it was too late to have a brother at all. Lena cried when I told her. Maybe this is good, she said. Maybe grief has finally made him grow up. I believed her because I wanted to. That is another thing betrayal feeds on. Not stupidity, hope. I made Adrian chief financial officer because he had a business degree, because I was exhausted, because Lena said we needed someone aggressive on the numbers if Mercer House was going to survive the next decade. The market had changed. Developers were circling historic properties all over the district. Boutique chains wanted character they could own. My instinct was always preservation. Lena called it fear. At first, Adrian was useful. He cut dead contracts, renegotiated vendor rates, modernized the booking software, flattered the bankers, smiled at the city council people who liked being remembered by men in tailored jackets. He worked late. He brought in ideas. He stood beside me in meetings and called me Gabe in that easy younger brother voice that suggested trust to people who had never seen him borrow $500 with tears in his eyes and lose it at a blackjack table before sunrise. Then, slowly, the house changed temperature. It was never one thing. It never is. Lena started saying our guests wanted energy, which meant louder music in the courtyard and brighter floral schemes in rooms my mother had chosen wallpaper for. Adrian started talking about unlocking asset value, which is a phrase men use when they want to make a place sound like dead weight before cutting it apart. Contracts began appearing on my desk already tabbed where I should sign. Renovation estimates doubled, then tripled. A consulting firm I had never heard of started charging us monthly retainers for brand transition strategy. Whenever I pushed back, Adrian smiled. Whenever I refused, Lena sighed. I was never shouted down. That would have been easier to name. I was managed. The beginning of the end, I think, was not the gala. It was the accident 6 months before it. Not a dramatic accident. No shattered windshield. No miracle survival. A delivery truck clipped my driver's side in a rainstorm on Bay Street. Mild concussion. 2 cracked ribs. 3 nights in the hospital because Lena insisted. For weeks after, I had headaches and some light sensitivity. I was slower than usual. Tired. Irritable. Lena took over more of my schedule. Adrian handled the pressure so I could heal. I let them. Because I was tired. Because pain makes delegation feel like maturity. Because your wife touching your forehead at midnight and telling you she has everything under control can still sound like love even when it is administration. There were moments, small, ugly moments, that I remember now with the clarity of hindsight. A doctor I didn't know asking too many questions about memory lapses I wasn't having. A stack of papers Lena placed in front of me one Sunday morning and said were insurance forms from the accident. I signed half, skimmed the rest, left 2 untouched because June asked me to help her with algebra. Adrian telling staff within my hearing that I was not quite back yet. Lena correcting him in a lower voice. Not in front of guests. I should say something honest here. By the time she announced my retirement, part of me was not surprised. Wounded, yes. Humiliated, certainly. But surprised, no. Some betrayals are not discovered in a moment. They ripen in the dark first. Upstairs in my office that night, I did not switch on the lamp right away. I stood by the window and looked down into the courtyard where the gala continued without me. Lena was already recovering the mood, turning toward another table, touching another elbow, letting the room see grace instead of fracture. Adrian was speaking to Bellwether Hospitality's regional director near the fountain. Bellwether. That was not a coincidence. Bellwether had been trying to buy Mercer House for 8 months. I had refused every approach. Too little money, yes. But more than that, the wrong hands. They turned historic buildings into curated imitations of themselves. They kept the brick, removed the soul, and sold the memory of having preserved it. I turned on the desk lamp then and saw the folder, cream-colored, centered precisely where my blotter should have been. My name on the front in Lena's handwriting. Inside were board minutes for a meeting I had never attended, documents authorizing a temporary executive leave due to ongoing neurological instability, and a draft transition plan appointing Adrian acting managing director with Lena as strategic co-chair during my recovery. There was a line for my signature on the last page. It had already been signed. My signature was good, too good. Whoever forged it understood that most people do not look at their own names carefully enough after writing them for 20 years. I do. My hand always dips slightly before the final L in Gabriel. The signature on the page did not. I sat down very slowly. Beneath the forged resolution was a doctor's statement recommending reduced professional strain. The doctor's name meant nothing to me. The date on the form was 3 days after the accident. The signature at the bottom of that page was not forged. It was mine. One of the forms Lena had put in front of me over coffee. Insurance, she had said. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling my grandfather had restored by hand in 1968 because he didn't trust contractors with plaster medallions. Then someone knocked softly. Not waiting for permission, the door opened, and June stepped inside. She closed it behind her and crossed the room without speaking. She was wearing a pale blue dress Lena had chosen and shoes she hated. She looked older than 16 and younger than she had that morning. "I told them you had a headache," she said. "Thank you." She came around the desk and laid a folded cocktail napkin beside my hand. On it, in her neat square handwriting, were 6 words. I saw them last week in 214. Room 214 was empty, or supposed to be. I looked up. June was staring at the forged papers. Then she said, very quietly, "Mom kissed Uncle Adrian in the service hallway on Tuesday. If she had screamed, I think it would have hurt less. I did not ask whether she was sure. Children become sure of adult treachery long before adults forgive themselves for seeing it. When? I asked. After the bellwether people left. I was looking for you. They didn't see me. I folded the napkin once, then again. June's voice stayed steady in that deliberate way hers did when she was close to tears and had decided she would rather die than let them come first. "I'm sorry," she said. That undid me more than the kiss, because she thought she was bringing me pain instead of truth. I stood, came around the desk, and held my daughter while she trembled once, and then forced stillness back into herself. "Listen to me," I said. "You did nothing wrong." She nodded against my shirt. After a moment, she stepped back, wiped under her eyes with her thumb, and looked almost furious to have needed comfort at all. "What are you going to do?" A good question. The kind my father would have answered too quickly. The kind Adrian would have answered theatrically. I said the only true thing available. "Not what they expect." She gave one short nod. "Good." Then she left me there with the forged papers, the napkin, and the first clean shape of revenge forming beneath my ribs. Revenge is too glamorous a word for what I did next. There was no weapon, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation in the ballroom. There was paperwork. There were phone calls. There was a long night spent learning exactly how far my wife and brother had mistaken restraint for weakness. The first call I made was to Evelyn Shaw, my father's attorney and oldest friend, who had known me since I used to steal peppermints from the dish in her office. She answered on the second ring and said, before I spoke, "I wondered how long it would take." That chilled me. "You knew?" "I knew Lena asked for copies of your medical directive and power of attorney after the accident. I knew Adrian requested historical bylaws last month. I knew neither of those things by themselves proved treachery." "By themselves." "You sound calm," she said. "I am trying very hard." "Good. Stay that way. I'm coming." By midnight, she was in my office with her reading glasses low on her nose, going through the forged documents page by page, while the staff below cleared champagne coupes and folded linen from what remained of my marriage celebration. At one point, she set a page down and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Whoever did this used a notary whose commission expired 8 months ago." "Adrian?" "Adrian is vain, not careful. My guess is he paid someone who thinks those are the same skill." She made 2 more calls, one to a forensic accountant, one to a litigation partner she disliked enough to trust. At 1 in the morning, after she had left me strict instructions not to confront anyone and not to sign anything at all under any circumstances, I went downstairs to the old office my father had kept, and I had not been able to change. I sat in his chair for the first time since his funeral. The room still smelled faintly of cedar, paper, and the shaving soap he had used for 30 years. The safe was behind a framed map of Savannah shipping routes, exactly where it had always been. Inside were insurance files, his will, some of my mother's jewelry, and a slim black ledger I had never seen before. My father had written across the inside cover in his narrow, deliberate hand, "For the day charm mistakes itself for inheritance." It was not a financial ledger. It was Adrian. Dates. Loans paid quietly. Debts settled with private bankers. Promises made and broken. My father had been cleaning up Adrian's disasters for 2 decades, documenting each one not to punish him, I think, but to force himself not to lie about the pattern. Near the back was an entry from 6 months before he died. If Adrian ever returns asking to help, Gabriel must remember that guilt is not the same thing as reform. Lena admires ambition more than character. Together they would be dangerous if they ever found common language. I read that line 3 times. Then I closed the book and rested my forehead against it until the room stopped moving. My father had seen them clearly. perhaps more clearly than he had ever seen me. What he had failed to do was say it aloud while there was time left for warning to be love instead of evidence. At 8 the next morning, while Lena was still asleep in our bedroom upstairs, and Adrian was probably nursing a mild hangover in the suite we reserved for extended family, I met Evelyn and the accountant in the breakfast room before service. His name was Martin Kroll, thin, humorless, the kind of man who could make an Excel sheet feel accusatory from across the table. By noon, he had enough to interest himself. By 4, he had enough to interest the police, though I wasn't ready for that yet. The consulting firm Adrian had brought in for brand transition was owned by a Delaware holding company whose domestic address matched a condo Lena had purchased 2 years earlier through an LLC. The renovation overages had been routed through subcontractors, then funneled into that same holding structure and one account in North Carolina under Adrian's control. The sums were not enormous by corporate standards. By family standards, they were surgical, big enough to weaken, small enough to hide under growth. "What about Bellwether?" I asked. Martin slid another page toward me. Letters of intent, not binding, but someone's been feeding them internal numbers for months. Occupancy projections, debt ratios, vendor weaknesses, your concussion notes, staffing concerns. Can you prove it? He looked at me with the mild contempt accountants reserve for emotional men. Yes. It is a strange thing to see betrayal itemized, almost relieving. For years, perhaps forever, you tell yourself pain is too intimate to be converted into evidence. Then a stranger in a gray tie points to a wire transfer and tells you the exact day your marriage began speaking another language behind your back. Lena came to my office at 6 that evening. She did not knock. She never had. For 17 years, that had meant intimacy. That night, it meant entitlement. She closed the door and leaned against it, watching me. "You disappeared." "I had work." "At our anniversary gala?" I almost smiled at the word "our." "Yes." She crossed to the desk, elegant as ever, and set down a cup of tea the way she used to when she wanted to soothe me into agreement. "Gabriel," she said softly, "I know last night was abrupt." "You think?" "You would have resisted if we discussed it privately." There it was. Not apology, strategy. I looked at her over my hands. So the public ambush was kindness? Her jaw tightened for half a second, then smoothed. "You've been struggling." "I had a concussion." "You've had mood changes, fatigue, memory lapses." "I have had none of those." She tilted her head. "You don't always see yourself clearly." There are sentences that end marriages long before divorce papers arrive. That was one of them. "Do Adrian and I get a joint diagnosis?" I asked. Her eyes changed then. Not much. Just enough. So June had been right, and Lena knew that I knew, or nearly knew, and decided the truth could still be managed if spoken gently enough. "This is not about Adrian." "No." "No. This is about Mercer House needing a future you are too sentimental to choose." The honesty of that almost earned my respect. Almost. "And sleeping with my brother is part of the future?" She did not flinch. That hurt in its own way. "We were already gone before that," she said. Not denial, not shame, just chronology. I remember thinking with remarkable clarity that I had married a woman who would confess to infidelity the way she might confirm the floral budget had run high. "We?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "We. You stopped being my husband somewhere around the time your father died, Gabriel. After that, you became curator of a dead man's preferences." The cruelty of that was sharpened by the fact that part of it was true. Not the affair, not the theft, but the museum of grief I had mistaken for fidelity. "I see," I said. "I doubt that." "Oh, I think I do." She took a breath, stepped closer, and lowered her voice. Sign the leave papers. Let Adrian handle the transition. Take time. Recover with dignity. We can keep this private. We, again. As if the words still belonged to us. I almost admired the nerve. Instead, I said, leave the papers. They're already here. Then leave the room. She studied me a moment longer, perhaps measuring whether I was angrier than sick, clearer than she had hoped, less broken than she needed. Then she turned and left. Only once the door closed did I realize I had been holding the armrests hard enough to ache. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Bellwether's people would be there. So would 2 local investors, our banker, and 3 board members my father had chosen precisely because they disliked fashionable risk and could be bribed only by certainty. Lena and Adrian believed Monday would formalize what Friday had introduced. They were not entirely wrong. All weekend I let them think I was wavering. I avoided direct conflict. I skipped Sunday dinner with June and Lena by claiming a headache. I answered Adrian's texts with vague restraint. Need time, not ready. Monday. He responded exactly as a man does when he mistakes delay for surrender. Take all the time you need, brother. We're protecting the house. Brother. The word looked filthy on my screen. On Sunday afternoon, June came to the library where I was reviewing audit files and stood in the doorway with a cardboard box in her arms. What's that? Mom's desk drawer, she said. She asked Rosa to have it packed for Monday. Rosa was Lena's assistant. Inside the box were vendor contracts, guest notes, an emergency cosmetics pouch, 2 monogrammed notebooks, and at the very bottom a velvet case containing my father's cufflinks. June saw me looking at them. She left them in the bathroom after the gala. I touched the case with one finger and shut the lid. June watched me carefully. You don't have to spare her for me, she said. No child should know to say that. I set the box aside. I am not sparing anyone, I said. I am choosing sequence. She gave me the smallest hint of a smile. My daughter appreciated precision. It made me proud and sad in equal measure. Are you scared? She asked. Yes. Good. Good? It means you still know this matters. That was her mother's sharpness, and my father's gravity fused into one unsettling child. I said, Monday will be ugly. Then let it be ugly for the right people. On Monday morning, I wore the dark charcoal suit Lena bought me for our 10th anniversary and the plain silver watch my mother gave my father before I was born. Not armor, just memory arranged carefully. The boardroom at Mercer House used to be a private dining room. Long mahogany table, tall shuttered windows, oil portrait of my grandfather looking disappointed in everyone equally. By 9 o'clock, the room held Adrian, Lena, 2 Bellwether executives, our banker, 3 board members, Evelyn, Martin Kroll, and me. Adrian opened with sympathy. That was almost the most offensive part. He thanked everyone for coming on short notice and spoke warmly of family duty, continuity, and my difficult recovery. Lena sat beside him in ivory silk, hands folded, every inch the woman supporting a painful but necessary transition. When he finished, he slid the leave resolution toward me with a Mont Blanc pen, the same pen my father used to sign payroll checks. I looked at it and nearly laughed. Before I sign anything, I said, I'd like to review a few points. Adrian smiled the smile people use on the unstable. Of course. I nodded to Martin. The accountant stood, passed out folders, and sat back down. Paper is the quietest weapon I know. For 12 minutes, Martin walked the room through unauthorized transfers, fraudulent vendor relationships, conflict of interest payments, concealed communications with Bellwether, and forged board materials created in anticipation of today's vote. He was clinical. That helped. No one could accuse emotion of exaggeration when the damage arrived, line item by line item, each number so calm it felt obscene. The first bellwether executive stopped taking notes around page 4. Our banker went gray around page 7. By page 9, Adrian had stopped smiling. Lena had not. Not yet. Then Evelyn spoke. She explained the invalid notary seal, the forged signature, the misuse of my medical documentation, and the liability now attached to anyone attempting to act on the transition papers. Only then did Lena's stillness crack. "This is absurd," she said. "You're turning internal disagreement into theater." I looked at her across the table. "You staged theater at my anniversary gala." "That was not—" "No," I said, and even I heard my father in the word. "You don't get to define form this morning." Adrian pushed back his chair. "You think a few accounting irregularities give you moral high ground? You've been drowning this place in nostalgia for years." $186,000, Martin said without looking up, "is not nostalgia." Adrian ignored him. He turned to the bellwether executives instead. "This is a family dispute. We can still move forward." "No," said the older of the two bellwether men, finally speaking. "I don't believe we can." That was the first true fear I saw in my brother's face. Because charm can survive accusation. It rarely survives the sudden withdrawal of opportunity. I took the black ledger from my briefcase and placed it on the table. "My father kept records," I said, "of many things, including the debts he settled for Adrian over the years, including his concerns about what would happen if ambition ever found moral permission inside this family." Adrian stared at the ledger like he recognized it as the one thing he had hoped never existed. Lena's eyes moved from the ledger to me and narrowed. "You planned this?" "No," I said. "You planned this." I responded. That line cost me something to say, because revenge, even when deserved, makes you aware of what part of yourself enjoys competence in cold blood. I turned to the board. "I am not taking leave. I am terminating Adrian Mercer for cause effective immediately. I am also placing Lena Mercer on administrative suspension pending formal divorce proceedings and civil review of her role in these actions." Lena let out one breath that might have been a laugh. "In your own hotel?" That, more than the theft, more than the affair, was perhaps the wound beneath everything. She still thought Mercer House was primarily a stage. "Yes," I said, "in my own hotel." Evelyn slid one final document toward the board. My father's amendment to the bylaws, signed 6 months before his death and never needed until now. Any attempt to sell, collateralize, or transition controlling interest in Mercer House under conditions of family fraud, coercion, or concealed conflict would trigger a preservation trust, transferring operational veto power temporarily to the Employee Council and Family Council until review concluded. My father had not trusted any of us fully. For the first time in my life, that felt like love. Rosa from guest services, Mr. Baptiste from maintenance, Chef Laurent, Angela at the front desk, people who had worked here long enough to understand what this place was when the flowers were gone and the invoices late and the guests grieving. Their signatures, held in escrow years ago under the amendment, now mattered more than my marriage. Bellwether withdrew on the spot. Our banker asked for separate counsel. One board member requested a recess, which Evelyn denied with visible pleasure. Adrian stood. "Gabriel." "No," I said. He stopped. Because sometimes a man hears, finally, that he is not dealing with the version of you he budgeted for. He looked older all at once. Not sorry. Just cornered. There is a difference. Lena remained seated longer than he did. Then she rose with grave, almost regal composure, gathered her folder, and said, "You will regret doing this in front of strangers." I looked around the room. The chef whose wife's surgery I had quietly covered last year. The front desk manager who had worked my parents' anniversary dinner. Evelyn, who knew where all our bodies were buried metaphorically, and would have been useful with literal ones too, if the law had permitted. "These are not strangers," I said. "That may be part of your confusion." She held my gaze 1 second longer. Then she left. Adrian followed her. Not together exactly, but not separately enough. The criminal complaint was filed that afternoon. Not because I am cruel. Because numbers become choices once you have children and staff, and a building old enough to punish neglect in ways insurance never fully respects. People lost money. People were lied to. I would have been turning my father into prophecy if I had covered for Adrian the way he once did. Lena asked for a private meeting 2 days later. We sat in the courtyard after closing, where she had once kissed me under jasmine so fragrant it made the whole night feel invented. She wore no ring. Neither did I. "Are you happy?" she asked. "No." She nodded, as if that were at least civilized. "I did love you." "I know." "Then why does it feel like you wanted to destroy me?" "Because I loved her once," I answered honestly. "I wanted to stop you." She looked away toward the fountain. "You always loved this house more than anything." "No," I said. "I just understood that some things die if you only love what they can become." That hurt her. I could see it. Not because she agreed. Because somewhere beneath her ambition, she knew the sentence was true enough to accuse. Our divorce was expensive, private, and cleaner than the marriage deserved. She did not fight for Mercer House after the evidence settled. She fought for narrative, for the right to say she had been trapped in a life curated by my father's ghost and my caution. There was truth in that. Not enough to excuse the rest. June chose to live with me in the carriage apartment for the first year after. Not because she hated her mother, because trust, once fractured inside a child, moves more slowly than adult apology. She still saw Lena on weekends. Sometimes she returned angry, sometimes silent. Once she came back and said, "Mom thinks you won." I asked what June thought. She considered that, then said, "I think everyone paid." That was the most accurate summary available. Adrian took a plea deal 8 months later. No prison. Restitution, professional bans, public disgrace, the kind that doesn't make headlines but settles over a family name like dust, you cannot stop seeing once light hits it correctly. He wrote me 2 letters. I answered neither. The first asked for mercy. The second asked whether I remembered the creek near Tybee, where our father used to take us fishing when we were boys. That was almost enough to break me. Almost. Because memory is the last refuge of men who have mistaken sentiment for accountability. Mercer House survived. More than survived. Under the Preservation Trust, and later under a restructured ownership plan I put in place with Evelyn's help, a portion of annual profit now goes directly to long-term staff equity and restoration reserve. Not because I am noble, because houses last longer when the people who keep them alive are treated like something other than background. We kept the old rooms. We kept the quiet. We kept the West Hall exactly as my mother loved it. But I changed too. That was the cost I had not anticipated. Once you learn how calmly the people closest to you can reorganize your life without your consent, you do not emerge tender. Not immediately. For a long time, I trusted paper more than faces. I checked signatures twice. I woke at 3 in the morning and listened to the pipes like they were telling me whether betrayal had a sound before it arrived in speech. I missed my wife. That shamed me. I missed my brother. That shamed me more. Not them, perhaps. The shapes they once occupied, the easier versions. The life before knowledge made every old dinner and every shared vacation look back at me with altered eyes. One winter evening, almost a year later, I found June in my office holding the black ledger. She had grown taller, sharper, 17 now, less willing to be protected from what she could already understand. "Did Granddad really write all this?" she asked. "Yes." She turned a page. Did you know Uncle Adrian was like this? Not enough. She closed the ledger carefully. Is that your biggest regret? I thought about that. Then I said, no. My biggest regret is that I kept mistaking being needed for being trusted. They are not the same thing. She set the ledger down and came around the desk to kiss my temple, a gesture so brief and unpracticed it nearly ruined me. Good, she said. That would have been a terrible lesson. After she left, I sat alone in the office my father and grandfather once used and looked out at the courtyard where Lena had taught me to see possibility and later taught me the price of not seeing hunger clearly enough. I have tried since then not to turn my life into a morality play. That is another form of vanity. Lena was not a monster. Adrian was not born a villain. I was not innocent. I was proud in quiet ways, passive in dangerous ones, too willing to call avoidance peace if the table stayed well set. The house magnified what we already were. That is what old houses do. Old families, too. Still, I know this much. At our anniversary gala, my wife announced my retirement before I knew I was leaving. She thought the humiliation would weaken me. Instead, it clarified everything. It showed me my brother in my father's cufflinks, my wife with her hand on his back, my daughter refusing to applaud, and a room full of people waiting to see whether I would surrender in public because I preferred dignity to conflict. They were right about one thing. I do prefer dignity. I just no longer confuse it with silence. My name is Gabriel Mercer. I kept the hotel. I lost my marriage. I buried my brother without a funeral. And some nights, when the ballroom is empty and the chandeliers are dimmed and Mercer House is finally honest again, I walk through the dark and think about how close I came to being erased politely from my own life. Then I lock the office door, check the ledgers, and turn out the lights myself.